Dus Creek sat under a hard noon sun. Every plank of every building bleached and cracked like an old man's knuckles. Luke Carver had planned on nothing more than a quick stop. Pick up coffee, rifle cartridges, maybe a new bridle, then ride home before the heat got mean. His horse was barely tied at the hitch rail when a sound cut through the usual saloon. Racket. Raised voices, sharp cornering. He followed the noise toward the livery. Dust and hay lay thick in the air, and the scent of sweat and horse piled on top of it. Then he saw them, 3 cowhands from the Red Elk outfit. He knew the type, men with too much whiskey, too much idle time, and not enough upbringing. They'd boxed someone in against the rail fence. Not someone, a young Apache woman. Her stance was narrow but steady, chin high, though her back touched the rough wood behind her. One man blocked her left, one blocked her right, and the third stepped closer than any decent man should. She said nothing, but her eyes held fury and fear tangled together. "Easy now," one of the cowhands drawled, reaching for her arm. She jerked back, sharp as a rattler. Luke didn't think. His boots just started moving, eating the distance between them. The cowhand noticed him too late. "That'll do," Luke said, voice flat as desert stone. The 3 men turned. Dust settled between them, as if waiting to see who'd make the first mistake. Luke kept his hands loose, but everyone could see how close his right hovered to his holster. "What's it to you, Carver?" the leader asked, squinting meanly. Luke didn't blink. "She's with me." The woman shot him a quick glance, surprised, wary, but not rejecting the lifeline he'd thrown. She didn't move from the fence, but she wasn't cornered anymore. "You sure about that?" the second man asked, stepping forward half an inch. Luke met his eyes without flinching.
"Try me."
Silence dragged out thick as tar. The cowhands weighed their odds. Luke Carver wasn't a man known for backing down, and he wasn't known for missing his shots either. Finally, the leader spat into the dust and jerked his chin at the others. "Fine, keep your friend." They walked away, muttering curses, looking over their shoulders like men who'd lost a hand of cards they were sure they'd win. When they were gone, Luke turned to the young woman. She still hadn't stepped away from the fence. "You all right, miss?" he asked quietly. She studied him a long moment before giving a single, guarded nod, just enough to show she was willing to trust him, at least for now. Luke watched the dust settle long after the 3 cowhands disappeared from view. The young woman's breathing was quick but controlled, the way a deer steadies itself after escaping a snare. She didn't back away from him, though she didn't relax either. Luke kept his voice low and steady, careful not to crowd her. "They won't bother you for a bit," he said, "but men like that usually come back around." She nodded once, her gaze drifting to her ankle. Only then did Luke notice the dark smear of dried blood along the side of her moccasin. The wound didn't look fresh, but it looked painful, and it had been hidden well enough that the cowhands probably hadn't noticed it. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed slightly, weighing him, testing his intentions. After a moment, she shifted her weight and gestured toward the shade, behind the trading post. She walked with a limp, small, but enough to tell him she'd been pushing herself too hard. Once they reached the shade, she sank to the ground with quiet dignity. Luke knelt, keeping his hands visible, waiting for her permission. When she gave the slightest nod, he loosened the laces of her moccasin. The cut was deep enough to sting, shallow enough to heal clean if tended properly. A thorn still lodged under the skin. "What's your name?" he asked, pulling his canteen from his belt. "Naline," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It means the one who listens." "Luke Carver," he offered. "Just a rancher passing through." She watched every move of his hands as he washed the wound, her expression unreadable. When his fingers brushed the thorn and she hissed slightly, Luke paused. "Sorry, it'll hurt for a second." She nodded and braced herself. He plucked the thorn free with a practiced touch. Blood welled, but he cleaned it quickly. "How'd you get it?" he asked. "A long walk." "A long week," that was all she said. But her eyes carried the weight of more. Distance, danger, maybe loss. Luke wrapped the ankle with a strip torn from a clean kerchief. As he tied the knot, Naline finally spoke again. "Those men will come for revenge," she murmured. "They don't like being shamed." Luke met her gaze. "They'll have to get through me first." For the first time, her guarded expression softened by a hair. She bowed her head in thanks, small but sincere. Luke sat back on his heels, feeling the desert heat settle around them like a warning. Trouble wasn't finished with either of them. Not yet. The fire had burned down to glowing embers when the night finally settled over the plains. Luke had grown used to the quiet, wind sliding over sagebrush, the occasional night bird. But tonight the silence felt too heavy. Naline sat across from him, legs folded neatly, eyes scanning the dark as if she could hear something far away that he couldn't, when the distant rumble of hoofbeats finally reached his ears. She was already on her feet. "They return," she whispered. Luke rose slowly, every movement deliberate. He reached for his rifle, thumb brushing the metal as he listened. 3 riders, maybe 4. The same men. Their silhouettes crested the low rise to the north, moonlight turning them into dark shapes with no faces, only intent. Trouble had a way of following prideful men. They slowed their horses, spreading out in a loose arc. Luke felt Naline step beside him, her presence quiet but unshakable. She held a stone-handled knife, the polished blade reflecting the firelight. She looked small against the wide sweep of desert, but she stood like someone who had survived storms larger than any of these men. The lead rider called out, "You're a damn fool, Carver. You should have stayed out of it." Luke didn't raise his rifle yet. "You should have stayed sober." A couple of the men chuckled, not with humor, but with the twitchy excitement of men who expected blood. They dismounted, boots crunching on dry earth. Luke could see their hands hovering near belts, guns, knives, whatever made them feel fierce. The air pulsed with the threat of what could happen if a single man moved wrong. "She's coming with us," the leader declared, taking 2 slow steps forward. "You don't get to claim her." "I didn't claim anything," Luke said. "But I won't let you take her." One of the cowhands lunged, more reckless than smart. Before Luke could raise the rifle, Naline burst forward with startling speed. Her knife slashed a clean line across the man's sleeve, cutting fabric but sparing skin. A warning, not a wound. She stepped back instantly, balanced, silent. The man froze, shocked by her speed. Luke raised the rifle now, barrel steady and unwavering. "Next step you take is your last." The other men shifted uneasily. They had expected an easy victory. They'd walked into something else. After a long, loaded moment, the leader spat into the dirt, signaling retreat. "This isn't over." Luke didn't lower his rifle until the hoofbeats had faded into the night. Only then did Naline exhale, shoulders loosening by a fraction. She met his gaze over the dying fire, and the understanding between them deepened without a single word. Dawn crept over the plains in slow strokes of gold, washing away the tension of the night before. The embers of the fire were cold now, but Luke had kept watch long after the cowhands rode off, just in case. When Naline stirred awake, she moved quietly, as if trying not to disturb the balance of the early morning. Her ankle held firm under the bandage he'd tied. Though he could see her testing her weight with care, she packed her belongings with the deliberate motions of someone used to traveling light, used to leaving quickly, used to never assuming safety lasted long. Luke respected that. He didn't press her about where she'd come from or what had driven her so far from her people. Everyone on the frontier had ghosts. Some just walked closer than others. "I travel east today," Naline said, as she fastened her medicine pouch around her neck. Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. "My family waits beyond the river. The trading moon is ending." Luke nodded, tightening his saddle cinch. "I'll ride with you as far as the river. After last night, no one should be traveling alone." She seemed about to decline, pride flashing across her face, but something gentler settled in her eyes. She gave a small nod. "The river, then." They rode in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Prairie dogs scattered as their horses passed. The early sun warmed the earth, stirring up the scent of sage and dust. Luke found himself glancing at her now and then, how steady she sat her horse, how sharply she watched the horizon, how the morning light softened the lines of exhaustion that had settled on her face the night before. She was strong, but strength didn't mean she didn't deserve a moment to breathe. When they reached the river, the water glimmered like molten glass. Naline dismounted and stepped toward the bank. listening to something in the wind or the flow that Luke couldn't hear. She turned back to him, standing tall despite her injury. "My people say paths cross for reasons," she said quietly. "Some crossings save lives. Some change them." Luke tipped his hat. "You ever need anything in Dus Creek, you ask for Luke Carver." Her faint smile tugged at her lips, quick, fleeting, but real. "I know where to find you." With a final glance, she slipped between the cottonwoods, her figure blending into the wild as naturally as the river itself. Luke watched until she vanished, a small ache settling in his chest. Then he swung into the saddle and turned back toward Dus Creek, knowing deep down their story wasn't finished, not by a long mile.